Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sermon Braindump. My name is Scott Dalen. I'm an ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa, and I present these videos every week for a couple different reasons. The first of which is just to take my brain out of the mode of background work, something I tend to call percolation mode, as I work and just kind of ponder on the text for the course of the week and move into the process of writing and preparing the sermon that I will preach to my congregation for the weekend. That's the first reason for doing these. The second is just to allow you, the viewer who have come across this video for whatever reason has brought you here today, to gain some different insight into the assigned gospel text for the week. So that's why I do these. This particular Sunday, which is May 7th, 2017, the fourth Sunday of the season of Easter, our gospel lesson comes out of John 10, verses 1 through 10. Now, this particular passage is part of what's known in John as the Good Shepherd discourse. Although, interestingly enough, in these 10 verses, Jesus does not call himself the Good Shepherd. That actually happens in verse 11, which I think is kind of funny, but that's the case anyway. This tends to be called Good Shepherd Sunday. The different readings are all kind of aimed at that theme of shepherds and sheep and being cared for. And so our other readings are along that same range as well. I also happen to really kind of like that the psalm this week is Psalm 23, probably one of the best known psalms. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So that's kind of where we're at. Now, in terms of the context of where this happens in John's gospel, directly preceding this, we had one of his signs. They're called signs in John, not miracles, but they're pretty much the same thing. And in that was the miracle or the sign of Jesus healing the man who was born blind. He happened to be, that was one of our readings back during Lent. So here, like a couple of months ago, and a couple of months ago, and very, very long reading in which Jesus finds this man who's born blind and he heals him. But the healing itself takes place like after the fact, which is kind of weird. Like Jesus spreads mud on his eyes and tells him to go and wash, and when he washes, then he can see. And there's this very long back and forth for the guy who gets kind of harped on from the religious leaders who couldn't figure out like how it would happen because it happened on a Sabbath, and so therefore it has to be bad and all kinds of this stuff going back and forth. So that's a very lengthy story. And then finally, Jesus finds the guy, again, after the fact, after he's been cast out of the synagogue, cast out of his community is probably the best way of putting that, and has an interaction with the man, and then says something about those who are blind have no sin, but those who say, I can see, their sin remains. So it's kind of this odd little exchange with some of the religious leaders who were also there at that point. And then that leads into this passage. Now, that's a really lengthy intro to get us to where we're at, but that's kind of what's going on. So with that, we'll jump in John 10, 1 through 10. Jesus says, very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes up. I'm going to try that again. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of the stranger. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So Jesus again said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. All right, so that is the passage for Sunday. And it's just part of an interesting situation. If we take this in the larger context, in the larger teaching, that also includes what I was talking about before with Jesus also talking about I am the good shepherd, this entire analogy, it really comes together to raise the question of what is this abundant life that Jesus is talking about, that he comes to give us? That's really the question that I'm kind of pondering in my head, and some background as to why. This particular Sunday happens to be Confirmation Sunday for here in my congregation. And if you are not familiar with what Confirmation Sunday is, it's also called the affirmation of baptism. That we believe that the promises that are made on our behalf at our baptism, which tends to happen when we are babies, not always, but tends to happen when we are babies in my tradition, that now at confirmation, that those students who are eighth graders in this case are claiming those promises for themselves. That the promises made by God and spoken over them at their baptism, now they are kind of owning, if you want to put it that way. And so as they kind of come to a close of this portion of their young life, and they're moving into the next chapter of their life of faith, that's always something that I want to think about. And that Jesus says, I come that you may have life and have it abundantly. Well, what does that look like? And you know what? That's a darn good question. And I don't think that we can give a cookie cutter answer to what that is. That what is life-giving for one person may not be life-giving for another person, and so on and so forth. So what does that mean? And I just think it's okay to acknowledge that we can't necessarily answer that. But more so, the other thing that I'm really kind of drawn to is an earlier portion when Jesus starts talking about being the gate. He actually says that twice. Later on, he'll say, I am the good shepherd, and he'll say that twice, even though that's not in these 10 verses. And so I've often kind of sat and to think about, well, he's the gate or the door. He's also the shepherd. But those are two like different parts of this whole analogy, this whole illustration. So how can he be both? And it's like, what? And admittedly, that's okay to be like, what? And kind of have a head scratch about it. But as I've thought about that and thought about not only these two, but throughout John's gospel, we hear a lot of statements from Jesus, I am. Sometimes he just simply says, I am, which is a reference to, hey, I am God. If you think all the way back to like Moses, when he asks God on the mountain, if the people ask me, what is your name? What should I tell them? And God says, I am. So when Jesus says, I am, he's stating flat out, I am God, whether you like it or not. So that's going on. But then also at times he will say, I am something specific. And for this instance, we have, I am the gate, or I am the good shepherd. And so what's it mean that Jesus is all these different things? And that's a great question. One that I've wrestled with a lot. It's well, how can he be both the shepherd and the gate? And how can he be the way, the truth, and the life? How can he be all of these different things? And as I ponder on that, I find myself going all the way back to the beginning of John's gospel, to the prologue, which is what it's called, where we hear that the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. Or in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came into being through him. All things. God is in all things. And the Word of God, who is Jesus Christ, the Word made flesh, all of these things came into being through Christ. And so he is in all of these things in one way, shape, or form. And do we understand what exactly that means? No, we don't. But to believe that God is present in all things, I think is part of why Jesus says all of these different aspects. For instance, I am the gate. Now, when he says that, I am the gate, it would seem that this pen that the sheep are in, it would seem, is like an example or an analogy or whatever you want to say of this abundant life, this life lived in the protection from whatever. Because if you think about a sheep pen, when they would come in at night and the gate was closed, that was to keep them safe, to keep them to get almost a sense of home for them, a sense of protection. That's what that was about. And you go in and out through the gate. That's just kind of how it works. The gate is open, and because of the gate being open, they can come in and out. And as we hear that within the passage as well, that he leads them out, or they come in and they go out and they find pasture. So Jesus is the way. And at times, admittedly, that can sound very exclusive. And this is something that Christianity is oftentimes criticized for, that it is so exclusive, or that it seems to be exclusive. And I acknowledge that, and yet I feel the tension of it, because I think that Christ is actually being inclusive, that he's stating that through our own effort, through our own attempts, through our own ways of trying to be enough for ourselves, to justify ourselves, we can't do it. We can't get through. It's only through Christ that it's possible to come into this abundant life, within the pen, whatever that means. And so Christ is actually trying to be inclusive, saying that there is a way, and I am that way. I think that's what that's about. But with a lot of rambling now, as I'm thinking back over everything I've said, there's a lot happening here. But coming back around to this confirmation thing, or this affirmation of baptism, I'm really honing in on the statement, he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. He calls them by name. And that is really, at least in my head, a baptismal analogy, or a baptismal reference, because in the waters of our baptism, we are called by name, but we're called by two different names. Our own, our given name, our identity that the world recognizes us by, but also we are given the name beloved child of God. And that is the identity that God sees us as God's beloved child. And so we follow the voice of the one that calls us by name, the one whose voice we recognize, even if we don't realize it in our lives, which there are those times when the voice of God is calling and we are not hearing for whatever reason. But Jesus is the shepherd, even though that's in verse 11 and not 1 through 10. But he's also the gate, and he's also some other things in John's gospel, and that's all good. That's all, it's all enlightening. It's all a reminder for us that in all things, God is present, that in all things Christ is present. And even if we don't always understand, which is in there too, Jesus knows that the people don't understand him, so he kind of says it again. That doesn't make it less true. And that's the hope that we cling to. As we go through this abundant life, as we go in and out and find pasture, as he leads us beside still waters, as he guides us along the paths for his name's sake, Psalm 23. As all of this is happening, as we live this life, we follow the voice of the one whose voice we recognize, whether we can see it or not. That was rambly. I kind of know it is, and my brain is still kind of swirling as I'm trying to work towards the sermon. But those are the focal points that I'm really thinking about. Is what is this life abundant? Well, it's a life that's lived in relationship with one another, but most importantly in relationship with God, made possible through Christ. And that's what that gate is. That gate is the way in to that abundant life, the way into that relationship with the living Lord. So all that being said, if you have any questions or comments, throw them down in the comment section. We'll continue the conversation that way. Otherwise, I hope you have a blessed week, and we will catch you next time.